The salt air carried more than just the scent of the sea that morning in Port Royal. It carried the weight of destiny, though Isabella Hartwell could not have known it as she stood trembling on the auction block. The Caribbean sun beat down mercilessly on her pale shoulders, exposed by the tattered remains of what had once been her finest dress. Around her, the crowd of merchants, sailors, and plantation owners murmured their assessments like cattle traders examining livestock. £20 for the girl, called out a voice from the throng, and Isabella's heart sank deeper into the abyss of despair that had become her constant companion since her father's gambling debts had sealed her fate. She had grown up in the relative comfort of Charlestown, South Carolina, where her father's shipping business had once flourished. But cards and rum had proven more seductive than responsibility, and when the creditors came calling, they took everything: the house, the business, and finally, her. The law was clear. Debts must be paid, even if it meant selling one's own daughter to recover the losses. 25. Another voice, rougher this time, belonging to a plantation overseer whose cruel eyes made Isabella's skin crawl. She closed her eyes and tried to remember her mother's voice, the woman who had died when Isabella was barely 14. "Courage, my darling," her mother had whispered during her final days. "No matter what storms may come, remember that you are stronger than you know." £30. The bidding continued, each number driving Isabella further from any hope of redemption. Then, cutting through the cacophony like a blade through silk, came a voice that seemed to carry the authority of the ocean itself. £100. The crowd fell silent. Isabella opened her eyes to see the crowd parting like the Red Sea, creating a path for a man whose very presence commanded attention. He was tall, perhaps 30 years of age, with dark hair that caught the sunlight and skin bronzed by countless days under the Caribbean sun. His clothes were finer than those of any sailor she had seen: a deep blue coat with silver buttons, pristine white shirt, and black boots that gleamed despite the dusty ground. But it was his eyes that held her captive, storm gray and seemingly capable of seeing straight through to one's soul. "Captain Blackheart," someone whispered, and the name rippled through the crowd like wildfire. The auctioneer, a portly man named Garrison who had shown nothing but contempt for Isabella throughout the proceedings, suddenly became obsequious. "Captain, such an honor to have you at our humble auction. The girl she's spirited, sir. Good breeding, they say. From Charlestown originally." Captain Blackheart, whose real name Isabella would later learn was Adrian Blackwood, stepped closer to the platform. His gaze never left her face, and she found herself unable to look away despite every instinct telling her to flee. "I can see that," he said quietly, his voice carrying a subtle accent that spoke of education and refinement, surprising for a man of his reputation. "She has the look of someone who has known better days." "Indeed, sir. Her father was a merchant before his unfortunate circumstances. She can read and write, unusual for someone in her current position." Isabella wanted to speak, to defend her father despite everything he had done to her, but her voice seemed trapped in her throat. She had heard the stories of Captain Blackheart, whispered in taverns and drawing rooms from Jamaica to the Carolinas. They said he was ruthless, that he commanded the fastest ship in the Caribbean, and showed no mercy to those who crossed him. They said he had never been defeated in battle, that he could navigate by the stars alone, and that he kept no permanent crew because no man could stand his cold demeanor for long. What they had never mentioned was how his presence could make the air itself seem to thicken with anticipation. £100, he repeated, pulling a leather purse from his coat. The coins within clinked with a sound that might as well have been chains. "I trust that settles the matter?" Garrison nodded frantically. "Of course, Captain, most generous. The girl is yours." "Yours." The word echoed in Isabella's mind as Captain Blackheart approached the platform. When he extended his hand to help her down, she hesitated for only a moment before accepting it. His touch was surprisingly gentle, though she could feel the calluses that spoke of a life spent handling ropes and weapons. "What is your name?" he asked as they walked through the dispersing crowd toward the harbor. "Isabella Hartwell," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "And you are from Charlestown, as the man said?" She nodded. "My father, he had debts. I am payment for those debts." Captain Blackheart was quiet for a long moment as they reached the dock where his ship waited. The vessel was magnificent, larger than most merchant ships Isabella had seen, with 3 masts reaching toward the sky like fingers grasping for freedom. The hull was painted black with gold trim, and the figurehead was a woman with flowing hair and outstretched arms, as if she were embracing the wind itself. "The Midnight's Revenge," he said, noticing her gaze. "She has been my home for more years than I care to count." As they boarded, Isabella became aware of the crew's curious stares. They were a rough-looking bunch, as one might expect, but she noticed something unusual. They watched their captain with what appeared to be genuine respect rather than fear. When he spoke, giving orders to prepare for departure, they responded with crisp efficiency. "Mr. Torres," the captain called to a weathered man with graying hair who appeared to be the first mate, "prepare the guest cabin. Miss Hartwell will be requiring accommodations." Guest cabin? Isabella had expected to be thrown into the hold with whatever other cargo they might be carrying. The unexpected courtesy left her even more confused about her situation. As the ship began to move away from Port Royal, Isabella stood at the rail and watched the island grow smaller. The setting sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, and she realized that this might be the last sunset she would see as anything resembling a free woman. Tomorrow would bring... what? She had no idea what Captain Blackheart intended for her, and that uncertainty was perhaps more terrifying than any clear threat might have been. "Are you hungry?" His voice came from behind her, startling her from her thoughts. She turned to find him watching her with an expression she could not quite decipher. Yes, actually. I haven't eaten since yesterday." "Then you will join me for dinner. Mr. Torres will show you to your cabin so you may refresh yourself first." The older sailor stepped forward with a respectful nod. "This way, miss." As Isabella followed Torres below deck, she caught a glimpse of Captain Blackheart still standing at the rail, now looking out at the darkening horizon. The wind had picked up, and it played with his dark hair in a way that made him seem almost ethereal in the twilight. What had she gotten herself into? And more importantly, what did this enigmatic pirate captain want with her? The guest cabin was unlike anything Isabella had expected to find aboard a pirate vessel. Though modest in size, it was appointed with surprising elegance. A narrow bed with clean linens, a small writing desk bolted to the floor, and even a wash basin with fresh water. A single porthole provided a view of the darkening Caribbean waters, and as Isabella cleaned the dust and sweat from her face and hands, she tried to make sense of her circumstances. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Miss Hartwell?" came Torres's voice through the door. "The captain requests your presence for dinner." Isabella smoothed her damaged dress as best she could, acutely aware of how inappropriate her appearance must be for dining with anyone, let alone the infamous Captain Blackheart. Yet when Torres led her to the captain's cabin, she found herself in an environment that challenged every assumption she had made about pirate ships. The cabin was spacious, occupying the entire width of the ship's stern. Charts and maps covered one wall, while shelves lined with books, actual books, occupied another. A large table dominated the center of the room, set not with rough pewter plates and wooden cups, but with china that would not have looked out of place in her father's dining room back in Charlestown. Captain Blackheart stood as she entered, and Isabella was struck again by his refined manners. He had changed from his earlier attire into a simple white shirt and dark trousers, though he retained his commanding presence. "Please sit," he said, gesturing to the chair across from his. "I apologize for the circumstances that brought you here, but I hope you will find the accommodations adequate." Isabella took her seat cautiously. "You speak as though I am a guest rather than what I am. And what is it you believe you are?" His gray eyes studied her face as a steward. Another surprise, as she had not expected such formality aboard a pirate ship. Served soup from a silver tureen. "I am property," she said quietly, "purchased to settle a debt. I harbor no illusions about my situation, Captain." He was quiet for a moment, breaking bread with hands that, despite their obvious strength, moved with unexpected grace. "Tell me about your father." The request caught her off guard. "My father? Thomas Hartwell, was it not? I knew of his shipping business. He had a good reputation once before the gambling consumed him," Isabella finished bitterly. "Before he lost everything we had and everything we were." She paused, a soup spoon halfway to her lips. "How do you know of my father?" "Our paths crossed years ago in a business capacity. He was an honorable man then. I was sorry to hear of his troubles." Isabella set down her spoon, her appetite vanishing. "Honorable men do not sell their daughters to pay gambling debts, Captain. Whatever my father once was, that man died long before his body followed suit. She had not meant to reveal so much, but something about the captain's steady gaze seemed to draw honesty from her like water from a well. He did not respond immediately, instead studying her with an intensity that made her feel exposed. "You mentioned that he has died?" he asked finally. 3 days after the arrangement was made. "His heart," the physician said, "though I believe it was shame that killed him." Isabella took a sip of wine, surprisingly good wine, and felt some of her tension ease. "I spent 2 weeks in debtor's prison before they decided to proceed with the sale anyway." "I see." The captain's expression had grown thoughtful. "And you have no other family? No one who might have intervened?" "My mother died when I was 14. I have an aunt in Boston, but she—" Isabella hesitated. She made it clear that harboring the daughter of a debtor would not be acceptable to her husband's business associates. The meal continued in relative silence, broken only by the creaking of the ship and the distant sound of waves against the hull. Isabella found herself stealing glances at her companion, trying to reconcile the stories she had heard with the man sitting across from her. This was supposedly the most feared pirate in the Caribbean, yet he dined with china and silver, maintained a library, and spoke with the accent of an educated gentleman. "May I ask you something, Captain?" she said, as the steward cleared their plates. "You may. Why did you buy me? Surely a man in your profession has no need for—" She struggled to find the right words. "For a woman?" He leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "You assume much about my needs, Miss Hartwell." Heat rose in Isabella's cheeks. "I did not mean to imply. That is, I simply wondered what purpose I might serve aboard your ship." The captain rose and moved to the large windows that formed the stern of his cabin, looking out at the moon's reflection on the water. "Perhaps I am simply a man who dislikes seeing injustice done to the innocent." "Innocent?" Isabella nearly laughed. "Captain, I am the daughter of a man who gambled away his family's future. Surely guilt by association—" "You are guilty of nothing more than being born to a flawed man," he interrupted, turning back to face her. "Should children bear the sins of their fathers? If so, then we are all damned from birth." There was something in his voice, a note of personal pain that made Isabella look at him more closely. In the lamplight, she could see faint scars on his hands and forearms, evidence of a life lived dangerously. But it was his eyes that held her attention, those storm-gray eyes that seemed to carry secrets as deep as the ocean itself. "Who are you?" she asked softly. "I mean, who are you really? You are not what I expected a pirate captain to be." He returned to his seat, pouring himself another glass of wine. "I am exactly what circumstances have made me, Miss Hartwell. Nothing more, nothing less. That is not an answer. It is the only answer I am prepared to give." His tone had grown cooler, and Isabella sensed she had ventured into dangerous territory. They were interrupted by a knock at the door. "Enter," the captain called. Torres appeared, his weathered face grave. "Captain, we have a problem. Ship on the horizon, flying British colors. She's fast and she's heading this way." Captain Blackheart was on his feet instantly, the refined gentleman replaced by the decisive commander. "How long until she reaches us?" "At current speed. Perhaps 2 hours. British Navy?" "Appears so, sir. Frigate class, heavily armed." Isabella watched this exchange with growing alarm. She had heard enough stories to know that encounters between pirates and naval vessels rarely ended peacefully. "Very well. Signal the crew to prepare for evasive maneuvers. We will not engage unless forced to do so." He turned to Isabella. "I am afraid our evening must be cut short. Torres will escort you back to your cabin." "What happens if they catch us?" Isabella asked, though she was not certain she wanted to know the answer. Captain Blackheart paused at the door, his hand on the handle. "That, Miss Hartwell, is not something you need concern yourself with tonight. Get some rest. Tomorrow may bring complications." As Torres led her back through the ship's corridors, Isabella could hear the crew moving with urgent purpose above deck. Shouts and running footsteps echoed through the vessel as the midnight's revenge prepared for whatever the dawn might bring. In her cabin, Isabella lay on the narrow bed and listened to the sounds of preparation. Through her porthole she could see nothing but darkness and stars. But somewhere out there, a British warship was closing the distance between them. She thought of her conversation with the captain, of the pain she had glimpsed behind his controlled facade, and of the strange courtesies he had shown her. Whatever tomorrow brought, she realized that her fate was now inexorably tied to his. The thought should have terrified her, but instead, As the ship rocked gently beneath her, Isabella found herself wondering what secrets Captain Adrian Blackwood carried in those storm-gray eyes. Isabella woke to the sound of cannon fire. The thunderous boom shook the entire ship, throwing her from the narrow bed onto the cabin floor. Through her porthole, she could see flashes of orange light illuminating the pre-dawn darkness, and the acrid smell of gunpowder began to seep through the wooden walls. Another blast closer this time, and Isabella felt the Midnight's Revenge shudder as if struck by a giant's fist. Somewhere above, men were shouting orders, and she could hear the distinctive crack of musket fire. The British ship had found them. Isabella pressed herself against the cabin wall, her heart hammering against her ribs. She had never been in a sea battle before, had never heard the terrible music of war played out on the open ocean. Each cannon blast seemed to shake her very bones, and she found herself praying to a god she had not spoken to since her mother's death. The door to her cabin burst open without warning, and Torres appeared, his face grim with urgency. "Miss, you need to come with me. Now." "What's happening?" Isabella asked, though the answer seemed obvious enough. "HMS Retribution caught us at first light. Captain's orders are to get you to the safest part of the ship." Torres grabbed her arm, not roughly but with firm insistence. "The hold, miss. It's the most protected area we have." As they hurried through the ship's corridors, Isabella caught glimpses of the battle raging above through open hatches. The British frigate was massive, easily twice the size of the Midnight's Revenge, its 3 decks bristling with cannon. Even to her untrained eye, it was clear that Captain Blackheart's ship was outgunned and outmanned. "Why don't we surrender?" she asked, as Torres led her down a steep ladder into the ship's belly. The old sailor's laugh was bitter. "Miss, pirates don't surrender to the Royal Navy. Best case, we'd all hang. Worst case—" He didn't finish the thought. The hold was dark and cramped, filled with barrels of water and salted meat, coils of rope and spare canvas. Torres settled her behind a stack of water barrels, the most protected spot he could find. "Stay here, no matter what happens," he said firmly. "If the ship starts taking on water, there's a lifeboat secured just above us. But don't move unless I come for you, understand?" Isabella nodded, though she doubted he could see her clearly in the dim light filtering down from above. Torres was halfway up the ladder when another cannon blast struck the ship, this one so close that Isabella felt splinters rain down from the ceiling. Alone in the darkness, Isabella tried to make sense of her situation. Yesterday she had been a prisoner sold to pay her father's debts. Today she was trapped in the hold of a pirate ship under attack by the British Navy. The irony was not lost on her that her circumstances seemed to grow worse with each passing hour. Above her, the battle raged with increasing intensity. She could hear Captain Blackheart's voice cutting through the chaos, calm and commanding even in the midst of combat. His orders were clear and precise, and despite her fear, Isabella found herself impressed by the way his crew responded to his leadership. These men would follow him into hell itself, she realized. The thought had barely formed when she heard a sound that made her blood run cold, the distinctive crack and groan of wood giving way under tremendous pressure. The ship lurched violently to one side, and Isabella found herself thrown against the barrels as seawater began seeping through the hull. The Midnight's Revenge had been hit below the waterline. Isabella could hear shouting above, more urgent now, and the sound of men running. Someone was yelling about the pumps, but even she could tell that the damage was severe. The ship was listing badly to starboard, and the water in the hold was rising steadily. She thought of Torres's words about the lifeboat and began to make her way toward the ladder. But before she could reach it, heavy footsteps thundered down from above. Captain Blackheart appeared, his white shirt torn and stained with blood. Whether his own or someone else's, she could not tell. "Isabella," he said, and the use of her first name in his urgent tone sent an unexpected shiver through her. "We need to go. Now. The ship is sinking," he finished grimly. "We have perhaps 10 minutes before she goes under completely." He helped her up the ladder with strong hands, and as they emerged onto the main deck, Isabella gasped at the scene of devastation. The Midnight's Revenge was indeed dying. Her mainmast had been shattered by cannon fire, sails hung in tatters, and bodies lay scattered across the deck. The British frigate loomed alongside, so close that Isabella could see the individual faces of the naval officers watching from her rail. "Captain!" Torres called from near the ship's boat. "She's ready." But even as they moved toward their means of escape, a voice boomed across the water from the British ship. "Captain Blackheart, this is Captain Morrison of His Majesty's ship Retribution." Surrender now and your crew will be treated according to the Articles of War. Captain Blackheart paused, and Isabella saw something in his expression that she had not expected. Not fear, but a kind of weary resignation. He looked around at his crew, at the men who had served him faithfully, and were now trapped on a sinking ship, and she realized he was calculating odds that did not favor any of them. "Captain," Torres said quietly, "your orders?" The pirate captain was silent for a long moment, the weight of command heavy on his shoulders. Finally, he called back across the water, "I will come aboard your ship to negotiate terms, Captain Morrison, but my crew goes free." "That is not how surrender works, Captain Blackheart," came the reply. "You will all come aboard and submit to His Majesty's justice." Isabella watched as Captain Blackheart's jaw tightened. She could see the internal struggle playing out across his features, the knowledge that surrender meant death for him and his men, but that continued fighting would only result in more bloodshed. "There is another way," Isabella said suddenly, the words leaving her mouth before she had fully formed the thought. Both Captain Blackheart and Torres turned to stare at her. "Miss?" Torres asked. Isabella's mind was racing, pieces of a desperate plan falling into place. "Captain Morrison," she called out, her voice carrying surprisingly well across the water. "I am Isabella Hartwell of Charlestown. I have been held captive aboard this vessel." A murmur arose from the British ship, and Captain Blackheart's eyes widened in understanding of what she was attempting. "Isabella, no," he said quietly. "You don't understand what you're doing." But she did understand, perhaps better than he realized. "I am the daughter of Thomas Hartwell, a loyal subject of the Crown," she continued. "I demand protection under British law." There was a long pause before Captain Morrison's voice returned, notably more interested now. "Miss Hartwell, how long have you been held captive?" "2 days," Isabella called back, the lie coming surprisingly easily. "I was taken from Port Royal against my will." Captain Blackheart was staring at her with an expression she could not decipher. Surprise, admiration, and something else she dared not name. "Very well," Captain Morrison called. "Miss Hartwell, you will be brought aboard immediately for your protection. As for the rest of you, Captain Blackheart, the offer remains. Surrender, and your men will be treated according to the Articles of War." Isabella turned to face the pirate captain, acutely aware that her next words might determine not only his fate, but her own as well. "Accept their terms," she said quietly. "Let them take me as a rescued hostage. It might be enough to spare your crew's lives." "And what of you?" he asked, his storm-gray eyes searching her face. "What happens when they discover the truth?" Isabella managed a smile that felt braver than she felt. "Then I suppose we shall both face the consequences of our choices, Captain." For a moment she thought he might refuse. But then, as the Midnight's Revenge settled deeper into the water, Captain Blackheart nodded slowly. "Mr. Torres," he said, never taking his eyes off Isabella, "signal our surrender." The HMS Retribution was a fortress of British naval might, her decks scrubbed clean and her crew moving with the precision that only years of discipline could instill. As Isabella was helped aboard by 2 naval officers, she felt the weight of curious stares from every direction. Behind her, Captain Blackheart and his surviving crew were being brought aboard in chains, their proud ship now nothing more than wreckage disappearing beneath the Caribbean waves. Captain Morrison proved to be a man in his 50s, with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to absolute authority. He received Isabella in his cabin with the courtesy due to a lady of good breeding, though his sharp eyes missed nothing as they assessed her appearance and demeanor. "Miss Hartwell," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat while a steward brought tea. "You have endured a terrible ordeal. I knew your father by reputation, a respected merchant before his difficulties. Please tell me exactly what transpired." Isabella had used the brief journey from the pirate ship to prepare her story, and she delivered it with what she hoped was convincing distress. She spoke of being taken from Port Royal, of being held against her will aboard the Midnight's Revenge, of her fear during the battle. She was careful to portray Captain Blackheart as a captor, rather than someone who had shown her unexpected kindness. "Most distressing," Captain Morrison murmured when she finished. "And you say the pirate captain made no improper advances during your captivity?" Heat rose in Isabella's cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or the memory of those storm-gray eyes, she could not say. "He kept me confined to quarters, sir. I was fortunate in that regard." "Indeed. Well, You need fear nothing more from that quarter. Captain Blackheart and his crew will be transported to Port Royal for trial. The penalty for piracy is, of course, death. The casual way he spoke of execution made Isabella's stomach clench, but she managed to keep her expression neutral. What will become of me, Captain Morrison? You will be returned to Port Royal as well, naturally. From there, arrangements can be made for your passage back to Charlestown, or wherever you have family to receive you. Isabella nodded, though the mention of family brought a bitter taste to her mouth. She had no family, no home, no prospects beyond whatever charity might be extended to the daughter of a disgraced merchant. The irony was sharp. She had sacrificed herself to save Captain Blackheart's crew, only to find herself returned to the same desperate circumstances that had led to her sale in the first place. Over the next 3 days, as the HMS Retribution sailed toward Port Royal, Isabella found herself in a strange position. She was treated as an honored guest by the British crew, her meals served on fine china and her cabin appointed with every comfort. Yet she was also, in a sense, as much a prisoner as the pirates chained in the ship's hold. She thought often of Captain Blackheart during those days. The British officers spoke of him with grudging respect, acknowledging his reputation as one of the most successful pirates in the Caribbean. They also spoke of his inevitable execution with the same casual certainty with which they discussed the weather. On the second night, Isabella made a decision that surprised even herself. She waited until the ship was quiet, then made her way carefully through the corridors toward the hold where the prisoners were kept. The guard stationed there was an older sailor who had shown her particular kindness since her rescue. "Miss," he said, startled by her appearance, "you shouldn't be down here. 'Tis no place for a lady." "I know," Isabella said softly, "but I need to speak with the pirate captain. There are things about my captivity that I need to understand before we reach Port Royal." The sailor looked uncomfortable. "I don't know, miss. Captain Morrison wouldn't approve." "Please," Isabella interrupted, "just for a few minutes. Surely there can be no harm in it. With you standing guard?" After a moment's hesitation, the sailor nodded. "5 minutes, miss. No more." The hold where the pirates were confined was dark and cramped, the air thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and despair. Most of the crew sat in dejected silence, their spirits broken by capture and the prospect of the gallows. But Captain Blackheart sat apart from the others, his back straight despite the chains that bound his wrists. He looked up as Isabella approached, and she saw surprise flicker across his features. "Miss Hartwell," he said quietly, "this is unexpected." Isabella knelt beside his position, lowering her voice so the guard could not overhear. "I needed to see you, to know that you were, that is, to know how you fared, as well as can be expected for a condemned man," he replied with a bitter smile. "Though I confess I am curious why you would risk being seen here. Your story to Captain Morrison was very convincing." "It was necessary," Isabella said. "Your crew, did my deception save them?" Captain Blackheart's expression softened slightly. "Morrison has agreed to commute their sentences to transportation rather than hanging. They will serve 20 years in the sugar plantations of Barbados, but they will live, thanks to you." Relief flooded through Isabella, followed immediately by a deeper sadness. "And you?" "I will hang at Port Royal in 3 days' time," he said with matter-of-fact calm. "It is the fate I chose when I first raised the black flag." Isabella felt tears prick at her eyes, though she could not entirely understand why the fate of a man she had known for only a few days should affect her so deeply. "Is there nothing that can be done? No appeal? No—" "Isabella." The sound of her name on his lips made her look up into those storm-gray eyes. "Why did you do it? Why did you save my crew?" She was quiet for a long moment, searching for words to explain something she did not fully understand herself. Because they did not deserve to die for the sins of their captain. Because— She hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been growing in her heart. "Because in 2 days aboard your ship, you showed me more kindness than I had known in the last 2 years of my life." Captain Blackheart reached out as far as his chains would allow, his fingertips barely brushing hers. "I am sorry that purchasing you from that auction block has led to this. You deserve better than to be caught up in the fate of a pirate." "Perhaps," Isabella said softly, "but I am not sorry that our paths crossed, Captain, even if the ending is not what either of us would have chosen." "Miss," the guard called softly. "Time's up." Isabella rose to go, but Captain Blackheart's voice stopped her. "Isabella, when this is over, When you return to Charlestown or wherever your life may take you, remember that you are stronger than you know. Your mother's words, I believe? She stared at him in surprise. How did you? You spoke of her during dinner our first night. Hold fast to that strength. It will serve you well. As Isabella made her way back to her cabin, her mind churned with emotions she could barely name. In 3 days, Captain Adrian Blackwood would hang at Port Royal, and she would be free to return to whatever life she could manage to build from the ashes of her father's disgrace. She should have felt relief, or at least satisfaction that justice would be done. Instead, as she lay in her comfortable bed listening to the gentle roll of the sea, Isabella found herself wondering if there was still time to change the course of fate itself. The thought was madness, she knew. But as she stared out her porthole at the star-filled Caribbean sky, she realized that sometimes madness was the only rational response to an irrational world. Tomorrow they would reach Port Royal. Tomorrow she would have to decide whether Isabella Hartwell was truly as strong as her mother had believed, and whether that strength extended to saving the life of the man who had, in his own way, already saved hers. The dawn was coming, and with it, choices that would determine not just her future, but the very nature of who she was meant to become.